Harold had spent 65 years building a life he could be proud of, a devoted husband, a doting father to three children, and the kind of man whose legacy was built on love and loyalty. His days were filled with warmth, family dinners where laughter echoed, framed photographs chronicling milestones, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing he'd done right by his family. But all it took was one moment, one unexpected piece of information to shatter the foundation of his carefully constructed world. A routine curiosity, a simple DNA test, unveiled a truth so devastating it left Harold questioning everything. The three children he had raised and cherished were not biologically his. And the betrayal wasn't new. It had been hiding in plain sight for decades, a secret his wife had carried in silence. Harold's life was a picture of contentment, or so he believed. Each morning he followed a familiar routine, brewing coffee in the kitchen where every corner held memories of family breakfasts, flipping through the morning paper with a sense of quiet pride, and glancing at the walls adorned with decades of family photos. In those frames were snapshots of birthdays, graduations, and family vacations, moments that reminded him of the love and effort he'd poured into his family. He took pride in his role as a father. He had worked tirelessly to provide for his children, attending every recital, every sports game, and every major milestone. His wife, Margaret, was his partner in everything, the woman he had loved since his 20s. Their love wasn't perfect, but after 40 years of marriage, Harold thought they had weathered every storm together. Yet, even in this seemingly perfect life, there were faint echoes of doubt, small, almost imperceptible moments he had dismissed over the years. A stray comment from an old friend at a family gathering, "Your youngest doesn't quite take after you, huh?" Or the times when he caught a flicker of something in Margaret's expression, a fleeting shadow of guilt quickly masked by a smile. Harold never gave these moments much thought. Why would he? His life was solid, his family was his anchor, and his love for them was unquestionable. But sometimes, even the strongest foundations can hide fractures waiting to be revealed. The unraveling began innocently enough. Harold's eldest son, David, had been pestering him to participate in a family DNA test, a harmless activity meant to explore their ancestry and learn more about their roots. Harold, ever the good-natured father, agreed without hesitation. It seemed like a fun way to connect with his children and perhaps discover some quirky tidbit about his lineage. He mailed off his sample and promptly forgot about it. Weeks later, the results arrived. Harold sat in his favorite chair, glasses perched on his nose as he scrolled through the report on his tablet. At first, it was fascinating, tracing his heritage back to distant lands, uncovering cultural threads that wove into the fabric of his identity. But as he read further, something didn't add up. The report flagged a discrepancy in familial relationships. According to the results, Harold was not biologically related to any of his three children. His heart skipped a beat. He blinked at the screen, thinking it must be an error. Surely the test was flawed. Yet the more he scoured the details, the clearer it became. The children he had raised and loved with all his heart were not biologically his. Confusion quickly gave way to a growing sense of dread. Questions flooded his mind, each one more painful than the last. Was this some kind of cruel mistake? Did the lab mix up the samples? Was there something about his own biology he didn't know? But as the shock settled in, a darker, more chilling thought crept into his mind, one he had no choice but to confront. Somewhere, buried in the fabric of his seemingly perfect life, was a secret. A secret his wife, Margaret, had kept from him for decades. And as the weight of the revelation pressed down on him, Harold realized that the only way forward was to confront the truth, no matter how devastating it might be. Harold spent days in a haze of disbelief and anger, replaying the DNA results in his mind as he tried to make sense of it all. The realization gnawed at him, eating away at the foundation of his trust. Margaret's smile, the shared glances during family dinners, the way she'd clasped his hand during life's trials, had it all been a lie? Unable to bear the weight of his thoughts any longer, Harold decided it was time to confront the one person who could provide the answers he desperately needed. That evening, he found Margaret in the living room, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she worked on a scarf for their youngest granddaughter. Harold stood silently in the doorway, watching her for a moment. How could someone so familiar suddenly feel like a stranger? Finally, he cleared his throat, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Margaret," he began, holding up the DNA report, "we need to talk." Margaret looked up, her smile fading as she saw the storm in his eyes. Her hands stilled, and for a fleeting moment, Harold thought he saw something flicker across her face. Fear, guilt, perhaps even relief. He launched into the discovery, laying out the DNA results and the questions that had been plaguing him. "I need to know the truth," he said, his voice breaking. Are they mine?" At first, Margaret tried to deflect, insisting there must be a mistake. But Harold pressed on, his frustration boiling over. Finally, with tears streaming down her face, Margaret confessed. Yes, she had an affair, years ago when their marriage had hit a rocky patch. She had been lonely, vulnerable, and made a choice she had regretted every day since. "I never meant for you to find out," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It was over before it began, and I prayed it would never come to this." Harold felt like the air had been knocked out of him. His mind raced as he tried to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with the one sitting before him. He asked her the hardest question of all, "Did you ever love me?" Margaret's response was immediate and raw. "Yes, Harold. Always. You were the love of my life. What I did was a mistake, a terrible, selfish mistake. But my love for you and our family was real. It still is." The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the sound of Margaret's quiet sobs. Harold's emotions swirled, anger, betrayal, sorrow, but beneath it all was a gnawing sense of loss. The life he had known, the trust he had in his partner, had been irrevocably altered, and now he faced a decision he wasn't sure he was ready to make. Could he forgive, or was this the end of the life they had built together? The days following the confrontation were a blur of emotions for Harold. Anger, grief, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. He found himself avoiding Margaret, retreating to the quiet corners of the house where he could be alone with his thoughts. Each time he looked at his children's photos on the walls, a fresh wave of pain surged through him. They were his children, weren't they? After all, he had raised them, cared for them, and shared countless moments of joy and pride with them. But now, he couldn't help but wonder if they had known the truth. Harold's turmoil only deepened when he decided to speak with each of his children. He started with David, the eldest, who had initiated the DNA test. Harold summoned the courage to share the results and Margaret's confession, his voice trembling as he asked the question that had been haunting him. "Did you know? Did any of you suspect?" David's reaction was one of shock and anger, but not at Harold. "Dad," he said, his voice firm, "you're the only father I've ever known. You've been there for us through everything. This doesn't change that. Biology doesn't define what you mean to me." Similar conversations with his other children followed, each echoing the same sentiment. Harold was their father, regardless of blood. Yet their own questions about their identity surfaced. Who was their biological father? Did they inherit traits or tendencies from someone they'd never met? The revelation had shaken the entire family, leaving them grappling with questions about who they were and where they came from. Meanwhile, Margaret was desperate to repair the damage she had caused. She tried to reach out to Harold, offering apologies and explanations, but he kept her at arm's length. For Harold, it wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was the years of deceit, the fact that she had built their family on a lie. He wrestled with whether he could ever trust her again. Despite his pain, Harold couldn't deny his love for his children. He continued to show up for them, attending family gatherings and offering advice, but there was a noticeable distance in his interactions with Margaret. The easy companionship they had shared was gone, replaced by an unspoken tension that hung heavy in the air. Harold also sought solace in his community, confiding in a close friend who had been with him through life's ups and downs. "What would you do?" Harold asked, his voice raw with emotion. His friend's response was simple but profound. "You have to decide what matters most, your pain or the love you've built. One doesn't erase the other, but only you can choose which one guides you forward." As the weeks turned into months, Harold found himself at a crossroads. Could he rebuild the trust that had been shattered? Or was it time to walk away and start anew? The answer wasn't simple, and the journey toward it was fraught with heartbreak and reflection. But one thing was clear: Harold's love for his children, and even for Margaret, remained. The question was whether that love could be enough to overcome the pain. Harold's journey toward resolution was neither linear nor easy. For months, he wrestled with conflicting emotions: the love he still felt for Margaret, the anger at her betrayal, and the unshakable bond he had with the children he had raised. His life had been split into two timelines, before the truth and after, and he wasn't sure how to reconcile them. Margaret, on the other hand, refused to give up on their marriage. She sought counseling on her own, read every book she could find on rebuilding trust, and even wrote Harold letters trying to explain her feelings. She didn't sugarcoat her actions, nor did she justify them. Instead, she expressed her regret and her commitment to making amends. "You are the love of my life," she wrote in one letter, "and I will spend the rest of my days trying to earn back even a fraction of the trust I destroyed." Despite his reservations, Harold agreed to attend couples therapy. Their sessions were raw and painful, filled with tears, accusations, and moments of silence so heavy they felt suffocating. But there were also moments of clarity, where Harold realized that Margaret's betrayal, while devastating, didn't erase the decades of love and partnership they had shared. He began to understand the complexity of human emotions and the vulnerability that had led her to make such a monumental mistake. At the same time, Harold leaned on his children for support, and they, in turn, rallied around him. Each of them found their own ways to reaffirm their bond with him. David invited Harold to a father-son fishing trip, something they hadn't done since David was a teenager. His daughter, Emily, brought over her young children more often, making sure Harold felt the joy of being a grandfather. Even his youngest, Jason, who had always been more reserved, opened up in a heartfelt conversation, saying, "You're my dad, no matter what. That will never change." The family also began to discuss the lingering question of their biological father. After much deliberation, Margaret revealed his identity, a man she had known briefly during a tumultuous period in her marriage. The children were curious but cautious, unsure if they wanted to pursue contact. Harold supported their decision, whatever it might be, but made it clear, "You're my kids, and nothing will ever change that." Over time, Harold found himself softening. The bitterness that had consumed him began to fade, replaced by a cautious hope. He and Margaret started spending time together outside of therapy: short walks, shared meals, and quiet evenings watching their favorite shows. While the trust they once had couldn't be rebuilt overnight, they found small ways to reconnect. Eventually, Harold came to a decision. Life, he realized, was too short to let pain define his future. Margaret had made a terrible mistake, but she had also been his partner for 40 years, the mother of the children he loved, and the person who knew him better than anyone else. Letting go of her would mean letting go of everything they had built together. With a trembling voice, Harold sat down with Margaret one evening and said, "I don't know if I'll ever completely heal from this, but I want to try. I love you, and I want to see if we can rebuild what we've lost." Margaret's tears flowed freely as she promised to dedicate herself to earning his trust and rebuilding their life together. In the end, Harold chose love, not because it erased the pain, but because it gave him something to hold on to as he moved forward. The scars of betrayal remained, but so did the enduring bonds of family and the hope of a future built on honesty and resilience. For Harold, this was the beginning of a new chapter, one written not in anger, but in the quiet determination to find peace.